A very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today. I'm Meher Gandhi, and on behalf of Kalinga Literary Festival, I gladly welcome Teresa Rahman and Shweta Singh for an enlightening evening and interaction today. Thank you so much both for taking our time and being with us today, so as to talk about so much that's upcoming. And allow me to introduce everyone to Teresa Rahman, the author of Bulletproof. She is an award winning journalist who is based in Northeast India. She has worked for several organizations, including India Today, The Telegraph, Tehelka, and Thumbprint. She's the recipient of several awards. She had received the Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award for 2 consecutive years for the category of excellence of reporting on JNK and the Northeast Print. And she also received the Lardley Media Award for Gender Sensitivity in 2012. Her other awards include Sanskriti Award 2009 for Excellence in Journalism and the seventh Sarojini Naidu Prize 2007 for Best Reporting on Panchayati Raj by the Hunger Project. And I can keep going on and on with names of awards. So thank you, ma'am, for being here and for
Thank
gracing
you.
this occasion with your presence. I would also like to introduce everyone very gladly I would like to introduce Shweta Singh. She is an assistant professor at GCS Indraprasth University in New Delhi. And her research, very interestingly, is focused on social research as well as communication and media. And as part of a section in her thesis, she has also worked on Orientalism frame in Gaddafi's death coverage. And thank you so much, ma'am, for being here and for talking to us and Teresa, ma'am. And with that, I warmly welcome both the eminent personalities. And today, Shweta Singh will be in conversation with Teresa Rahman about the latter's book, Bulletproof: Nuances of Conflict Reporting from India's Northeast. I would now invite Shweta ma'am to kindly take over the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks so much for those generous words. And very pleased to be here talking to Teresa today about her book. Um, I'm actually doubly glad because Teresa happens to be a very close friend and my batchmate from the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, Delhi. So, Teresa, very nice to be talking to you today and going through this book that you have written. And I remember I was there when it was launched at the Bahari Sons, Bulletproof, a journalist notebook on reporting conflict. So, I'm just putting it on the screen here for those who may be interested. So, this book is about Teresa's kind of close experiences as she went about covering conflict stories from India's Northeast, as the session is titled. So we will engage with uh, how she went about experiencing those stories and what were the nuances she would, um, like to share with us maybe in the session today for those who are interested. So, Teresa, maybe if we can come to the book as we go along, but before we talk about your book, can you just tell us a bit about yourself, as in what brought you to journalism, and as you've shared with us on other occasions that you are a first generation journalist, you've also mentioned it in your book, so you may have broken many glass ceilings. So please tell us about your journey and also how you kind of grew from a went about from a journalism school into this space of conflict reporting. So that would be really nice to maybe start with.
Mhm. Thank you, Meher, Shweta, and the organizers of Kalinga Lit Fest for inviting me for this very important discussion. In fact, talking about Orissa, I have a very endearing connection with Orissa. My father studied in Regional Engineering College in Rourkela in Orissa, and some of my best friends, Shashwat and Lopa, they are from Orissa, and I met them in Delhi. And actually, I studied at IIMC, and I came back to my home state, Assam, But it was only after my initial training on the basics of journalism, you know, after specializing in print media at the Indian Institute of Mass Communication. I had interned at the features desk of Indian Express, and then I worked as a trainee. I started my career as a trainee journalist at the editorial desk of India Today magazine, where I got an opportunity to work with some of the best editors of the country. In fact, there was a joke once that there are two types of journalists in India: those who worked for India Today and those who didn't. So, I had to come back to Assam due to some domestic constraints, but only after my basic training was complete. And back in Assam, it was a different world. The media was still evolving. And I had joined the Northeast Bureau of the Telegraph newspaper, and I handled the features section there. So here, now, this was a new kind of I got a hang of the regional media, and I got a sense of how regional media work, and did everything from covering a local football match to writing about a couple who could see after a cornea transplant, while doing a larger story about eye donation. And I also did an investigative story about the appalling condition of the state home for women, and this led to a probe by the state high human rights commission. And then back then I was catering for the readers in the Northeast. But when I joined as the principal correspondent reporting Northeast India for Tehelka magazine, I was in fact writing for the entire nation. I was telling the stories of Northeast India to the entire nation. And talking about breaking glass ceilings, as a first generation journalist, I learned on the job. There were no mentors or godfathers, and I also learned and unlearned many theories that I learned in my journalism school, and I also broke many rules. I still remember, talking about breaking glass ceilings, I still remember this incident. I had written about uh, our governor. The governor of Assam was again from Orissa. He was J.B. Patnaik. He was an eminent Sanskrit scholar, and he had taken a group of women to Vaishnavite monastery, or popularly known as a satra or a hotra, and he took them because women were not allowed in that in that satra. So I wrote about it, and in fact I bagged the Ladli Media Award for gender sensitivity for writing that story. And it so happened that the governor got to know that I wrote about his initiative, and I was, lauded for it. So he called me to the Raj Bhavan. I got a call one fine morning, and uh, it, there's someone who said that the governor wants to meet you. So that was the time when my second daughter was just three 2 months old, and I was actually nursing the baby. I was breastfeeding the baby, so I could not leave her behind, and I could not refuse to go and meet the the first person of the head of the state calling me. So I decided to break one rule. I carried my baby with me, and I told the governor that, see, I'm breaking protocols here. I got my baby with me, and so he smiled and he said, "Oh, so your daughter wants to see the world." So that is where I told him that, see, when you send out those official invitations, you always write that women and children, children below 5 years not allowed. Sorry, just children below 5 years not allowed. So I said, when you write that, you're actually saying women not allowed. So then he said, oh, that's a very interesting point. I think we should make these changes in our official protocols. So these are small ways in which I feel that I could break some glass ceilings, and break some rules. It's important to break some rules in order to make a change. And this was one tiny incident that I wanted to share, as a and also that Orissa connection here. So yeah, and then reporting for Tehelka was, it was inevitable that I had to, when you are reporting from one of the most underreported regions of the world, I would say, the northeast of India. And it has seen several decades of violent insurgency. So it's inevitable that you write about insurgency and the conflict that has and the low intensity war that's been going on for several decades. And as a journalist too, you can't remain unscated by it. So that's how it all started. And there's a very interesting thing is that uh, this is a region that is out of the radar of the so-called national or mainstream media, and it is also out of the radar of the corporate media, corporate world. So there are certain things that sell, for a a media house, and conflict sells. I've been told that you write about I know when I write I can if I manage to interview a top rank militant leader, I know I'd get space. So conflict sells. So that's a very interesting perspective about media marketing and sales. Anyway, that is how it all started.
Yeah, I think it's very fascinating actually. And I read in your prologue of the book, in the book, that you mentioned somewhere in the very first few pages, can a journalist's gender be an issue in reporting conflict? So maybe we can talk about that as we go along. And you have already kind of set the stage by sharing your experience of carrying your baby and meeting the head of the state. So I'm sure there would be many occasions on which you might have contemplated on that on the fact that um, if he if you were, say for example, if do men have a better say access or space in, or maybe they are trusted more by the mainstream media to cover conflict. So we can come on that later as we go along. And if there are questions and comments as we go along discussing them, I would request those who are watching us on social media platform kindly drop them in the comment section wherever they are watching us, whether on Facebook or Twitter. Um, Moving on, Teresa, it's very interesting that you mentioned the fact that northeast, when it comes to the coverage of northeast, most of the time it is about the conflicts, the insurgencies, the militant attacks, the killings. Most of us who are in the so-called mainland don't get to know northeast as it is beyond these stories, right? So you also mentioned that the corporate sector is also not interested. So please do reflect on that as we go along. Um, Going through the chapters, one gets a sense that you spent many years covering conflicts in the Northeast region, right? So you went to different states, and like you covered, say, the alpha leaders, you covered the sniper, you had an interview with a sniper, you kind of covered, say, for example, the state heads, the non-state actors. You covered the relatives of the militants. So you've been like treading a tightrope in that sense, and I'm very fascinated with the title of the book, The Bulletproof. So do share a bit as to how did you arrive at that title. What were the issues related to safety concerns, and what were the support system available to you at that point?
Uh, I just remembered another very interesting thing when as a child, I used to read a lot of Superman comics, and Superman in real life was a reporter, I think
Acha.
there was this newspaper called the Daily Planet, and he used to, wear his dress and used to fly away from the window of his office. So, I was fascinated by those stories,
The
and
Spider-Man kind of.
Spider-Man, no, Superman. Superman.
Okay. Mm.
Uh, well, coming back to the title of the book,
Mm-hmm.
Bulletproof, like I remember attending the regional conference, first regional conference of an organization called the South Asia Women in Media, and we were having a session on reporting conflict, and there were women journalists from uh, all the South Asian countries, including India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and we were, having a conversation, and prior to that, there was this session where a very senior journalist from Pakistan, Mariana Babar, she said that, women going to the field and actually reporting conflict in South Asia is something new to our generation. This has not happened before. And while our session was going on, the moderator suddenly asked me, "Do you wear a bulletproof jacket when you go reporting?" So that was a question actually, that actually rattled me, because I had, till that time, I didn't know that bulletproof jackets existed for journalists. You know. It was much later in my career that I got to know that, especially the foreign media, they it's part of their, whole paraphernalia that they carry with them, the bulletproof jackets or helmets, even when they go for go to report at a scene of disaster, a natural disaster. And there's a special kind of a training that takes place when they go reporting. It's called HIFAT, hostile environment and first aid training. So these are the kind of things that we never heard of, reporting from the periphery, from the margins. We This kind of ideas didn't exist. Forget about, these things being uh, existing for us. And I was very young, and I was very passionate about my work, and I just had to get my story. I just got into it, and I just went out with a pen and notebook and, my intuition. I just trusted my, sixth sense, and I just went there. And as I said, as a first generation journalist, my parents didn't know where I was going. My family didn't know where I was going. So it was like I had my own network of sources. I had this, some source in the who was a waiter of a posh hotel, or a nurse in a hospital, or uh, you know um, all kind of sources, the pan shop wala. I had this network, and they used to give me information. They were my sources. And this is how, I went about doing stories. And when I had to when I I never thought that one day I would write about my experiences. And that was when I went to the field to do hardcore conflict reporting. There was no smartphone, so you won't find selfies, clicking selfies, or you won't find good photos. It didn't occur to me that I could keep a photo, click a photo with someone. And so that is how, these are all things which were there in my crumpled notebooks. And when I wrote about these in Bulletproof, in fact, I was planning to call it Bulletproof Jacket. Then this friend of mine told me that, why don't you call it bulletproof? You are bulletproof, And journalists like you, reporting from the periphery, reporting from the margins, without reporting from a region that has seen several decades of violent insurgency. You're constantly flirting with danger, and you go without any kind of protection, without any kind of physical, and you never thought about how it took a toll on your mental health, your psychological health. So is it, that's why I called it bulletproof. That is, I'm bulletproof, and so are all the journalists working in the periphery, working in regions like the northeast of India, are bulletproof. So that's how the name came about.
Yeah, so that kind of gives us a glimpse that, and of course, I mean, we know that there is a whole lot of risks that is involved in treading these spaces, and as a journalist, or even as citizens, we aren't prepared to engage with them. So as you went about, like you said, there were situations, so when if it was for a journalist in any other part of the world, probably that journalist would have carried some safety gears and would have had some kind of a support system. So just tell us maybe a quick, if you could recollect an instance where you faced some kind of a serious threat where you thought you should have been better prepared.
There's certain things where, say for instance, I'm going to a militant camp, and I instinctively I wear a full sleeve shirt and I cover myself with a scarf. It just comes instinctively. Maybe I should be careful. That thing. Mm, I know often call myself a survivor because nothing unpleasant happened to me. Uh, maybe because for most militant groups, their publicity wing is one of their most important wings. And in my book, I've written a chapter called Media Savvy Militants. So
Yeah.
I was treated with a lot of respect, and actually they didn't know how to handle a woman, woman journalist. For them it was very awkward, and they never looked in my eye. But yeah, once I was caught in a crossfire when I was in Nagaland, and all I could do was call up my editor in Delhi and tell him that there's a shooting going on, and he said, "Oh dear, be careful." That's all. And I didn't even have a smartphone, so.
God.
These are things. I had bruises in my arms. I had to crouch, but then as I said, I never thought that I should have been careful. So this is a book written in retrospect where I think that maybe I should have been careful. And maybe I'm lucky that I didn't become another statistic, another journalist killed in Northeast India, or those one of those statistics. And talking about the media savvy militants, I would like to, if you don't mind, I would like to read out just a bit
Yeah,
about
yeah, please go ahead.
this. This is a chapter called Media Savvy Militants. So here I write about Alpha, late 1980s. Exciting things were happening in the publicity wing of the outfit. The fledgling publicity wing is witnessing some major changes with its foray into cyberspace. Its major brush with technology. In 1989, the band outfit acquired its prized possession, an Apple Macintosh, for a precipitous price of rupees 1.5 lakh from Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. It is a closely guarded secret, and the then Alpha Publicity Secretary Sunil Nath, alias Siddhartha Fukan, is one of the few people who knew about it. Even the regular alpha cadres didn't know that an Apple Macintosh has been bought. And it is not a regular acquisition. It changed the way the outfit delivered messages in its early days. In the initial years, militant groups used human couriers, even women, to deliver messages. This system has its pitfalls, the danger of being caught by security forces, but the proliferation of the internet changed things. And this internet actually propelled the IT revolution in the outfit. It created a safe space, overcoming psychological and geographical barriers for sending messages to the outside world, especially the media. And you know this Sunil Nath of Alpha. He was in charge of Alpha's publicity wing, and he interacted with the media very closely. And he said that he started off as a novice while being at the helm of affairs in Alpha's publicity wing. They did not know even the ABC of media. So they did not go to any media school, nor was there anyone to train them on the nuances of media operations. At a later stage, however, they tried to train the boys working in the publicity wing. The main source of news for the publicity wing were newspapers published from Assam, and some important ones from the rest of India and abroad. And radio was a handy source, especially in the remote areas. So, these are very interesting things which I came across while reporting conflict. And actually, this book is story. The stories behind the stories. You know, the story behind the stories, what the journalist encountered, the stories, the things that I probably could not write in my stories. But these are the stories which remained, and these are the stories which I wanted to tell. And maybe it can help some media student interested in reporting conflict or doing some research, media research on conflict.
Yeah.
This can be a document.
Oh yes, actually, because as a teacher, I've been teaching journalism and mass communication for quite some time now, and we have been engaging with how media connects with people, all kinds of stakeholders. But I have not come across any research so far that connects with how media is being used as a tool for propaganda by militants or by the non-state actors in that sense. Maybe because it is tough to navigate that space also, like it must have been tough for you as well to navigate that space. So I'm sure this is going to be a great kind of a contribution in that sense to scholars who may be interested in engaging with that particular chapter where you're talking about how the militant groups or these outfits use media for the purposes of reaching out to the larger masses, or even to kind of convey their points of view, their perspectives on, say, for example, whatever they are fighting for, whether it is the sovereignty of the territory, as they call it, or whatever. So, moving on, I think from the response you've just given us, I mean, the two things that occur to me at this point. One is about, the fact that media is being used by the militant, militants back there, and it's going to be interesting addition for us media scholars to kind of uh, reflect on that and engage more on that. The other thing that probably I would probably seek your response on is that um, the when you're talking about technology usage by these outfits, the things have changed, and the whole scenario, the mediascape has changed in the last 10, 20 years. There has been a huge digitization process, and we have been able to kind of connect with the unconnected spaces across the world. And so as much as we have been able to connect with the Northeast, so please share as to how do you kind of what is your experience in terms of how this digitization process has probably helped connect Northeast with its stories with the rest of India, which is totally, if not totally, yeah, in almost in oblivion of what's happening out there, apart from major stories of deaths and crime and some kind of attacks and something like that, unless there's a major intervention. So tell us how digitization is altering, kind of contributing to this shift.
Uh, I would tell you something very interesting, Shweta. The 9 o'clock news aired from the fancy TV studios of Delhi and Mumbai uh, are no longer sacred for us. We don't wait for that 9 o'clock news anymore. We are, it's amazing how the people of Northeast India are using technology to tell their stories, how they are, uh, they have set up news portals and in regional languages, and there are so many YouTubers and vloggers who are telling their stories, who are vlogging about their daily lives, and this kind of hyper local news that you are getting now, uh, like small villages, small areas are having their own news portals, and there are interesting things like uh, say this shop is giving mobile on EMI, so they're like all the local people are talking and say I bought a phone, bought a phone. It's like a advertisement, but it's a news, and I was watching these. I did a lot of media analysis, so for the Hoot, and that's how I got interested in how to see how media is evolving. And so this proliferation of hyper local news, I think is a very very interesting change that's happening in an underreported region like northeast of India. Earlier we knew nothing about this region, and now you have everything. You have people telling you that uh, there's a new pharmacy in this village, a new pharmacy has been set up. So that's a news, it's like, I was wondering, like, how can this be a news? But then, then I realized that for a place where uh, there are no hospitals or doctors, setting up of a pharmacy is so important, and where you get all kind of medicines. You don't have to go to a big city, and other things, like, oh, there has been a theft in the backyard. All the all the fruits were stolen at night. So even that was a news. So that was so it's interesting, and people are talking in their own ethnic mother tongue, in their dialects, and especially about YouTubers. I know, I have been watching this, following this YouTuber in Arunachal Pradesh, this young girl who lives in Itanagar, and she was narrating how she travels to her village, which is like 3 days away from Arunachal Pradesh, from Itanagar, the capital. And she was filming the whole thing. She is a YouTuber and a vlogger, and she was filming the whole thing, and how they stop over at night, and there was a sort of a cave where they stay overnight, and to keep themselves warm. And then the broken roads, they have to get down and push the car, and it's like, they even have to cross a stream. They usually go in a sumo or a SUV. And finally, when she reached her village, she said that, see, this is the village, and I wanted to show the rest of India that this is also in India. This is also a part of India, the India that you don't see in your so-called national televisions or media. So, as I, we are not waiting for others to tell our stories. We are
Yeah.
telling our own stories. Yeah, and we're not waiting for the so-called national media. So that's a big change that digital technology has brought about. That's very interesting, actually.
That's nice actually, because there are two sides of digitization. One is this information explosion, and one is this democratization. So it's nice that you see it. That is it's a positive development in that sense. At least stories that ought to come to the fore are being getting documented. So how it shapes up in future, maybe it is something that we have to wait for. But I'm curious to understand at this point, Teresa, as to when you write a book like this, where you tend to give the, you know, you go behind you tell the stories behind the stories, and hence go very close to the individuals, and we see their human sides. So you see them as humans first and militants next, or snipers with even they are like god worshippers. They go to markets and purchase their daily goods, the routine stuff. So they are into relationships, they live routine lives, they have their own vulnerabilities. So these are the aspects that you kind of bring to the fore through your stories. I'm sure, because this is a story behind the story. I mean, the actual stories might have gone the mainstream media earlier, but as you kind of cover these stories, do you also fear that, in some sense, you're trying to, as you're going about telling the human sides of their lives, uh, uh, you're probably trying to justify, or maybe get into that side of the story which they are trying to tell. And there's always this balancing act that the journalist has to do when covering these stories about conflict areas. And conflict has so many dimensions to it. So did you ever fear that maybe you will be like, somebody might just ask you as to where was the need for to tell such stories, the stories behind the stories that you're trying to tell?
Uh, you see, for me, telling the story of men, women, and children is important, and I try to go with an open mind. I observe things, I engage in conversations with everyone. I try not to censor myself. And as a journalist, telling the story is important, and telling it well is equally important. And it can be any story. It need not be only a conflict story. It can be any normal story. You have to tell it well. And the focus in my work is to demystify the conflict, humanize it, talk about the human helplessness and desperation. Conflict in Northeast India is real. The fear factor is real. And as a journalist reporting from the region, I was in a constant quest for that larger vantage point. The disruption of everyday life, the untold stories of uh, separation of families, the breaking down of villages and traditions, and most importantly, I was not trained in one of India's premier media schools how to deal with the situations that conflict often bring forth. you know um, the vast and diverse region of Northeast India is often ghettoized into a monolith, and for a journalist, mapping this terrain is a very daunting task. And there are many quandaries of the region that has been reported by writers and journalists, and often there are no easy answers. The conflict reporting seems very masculine, full of stories of artillery, statistics, guns, weapons, soldiers, militants, peace talks. Peace talks are often between men. Men engage in peace talks, and dry press releases. So the subplots, the stories of the common people, of women and children, they are missing. For more so, a woman reporting hardcore conflict from the region is unheard of. So I feel I represent the dichotomy between the grounded field journalist and the media desk operating from the big metros. So my understanding helps me from getting sucked into that control narrative. you know it could be the narrative of the state or the non-state actors, or endorsed by various forces. So this is, I think, it's very important that you are grounded and you understand the nuances. You understand, you know you have you understand the socio economic, socio political milieu. And yes, sensitivity is very important. How and and going with an open mind is so important.
So how do you do this balancing act so that you don't feel that you're going very close and somewhat what in the other parts of the world what they probably call it like getting embedded or something like that. So how do you maintain that required distance to be kind of objective and say this far and no further, so that I don't tread on the side where I get a perspective that maybe may not be in the larger interest of the country. How do you do that?
uh, it's very difficult, actually. And there are no one answers to it. You go there, like, for instance, I went to this. There's a small militant group of the Adivasis. It was called the Adivasi Cobra, and there I met this young boy who took me on his bike, and he was like, he was telling me a lot of stories about himself. He's like the local hero. And then he asked me, you came alone, where is your camera? So he expected the TV camera to be with me. And then I was just observing him. He was just barely a teenager. And uh, and he was calling me Baido is like, elder sister. So, but I was observing him, and I asked him, what is it? No, I'm doing this for my community. So, there are different versions of freedom fighters, and different versions of leaders. So we have to negotiate, and uh, draw a thin balance between them. And yes, there's a very interesting thing that I've written about in a chapter called The Sniper, where I was in fact suspected to be a government agent. So you are talking about, when I was asking so many questions to a sniper. He was a sharpshooter of the NDFB, the Borough. So he suddenly he asked me, "Are you an agent of the government?" So we have to, it's like walking on a tightrope, and walking a tightrope, and constantly flirting with danger. Nobody trusts you. As a journalist on the field, everyone is suspicious. Who is she? Why is she here? So um as I told you, reporting conflict can bring surprises in every step. You don't know what to expect. And now, since I've written this book, this can't be a guidebook. As in, whatever happened with me may not happen to you. There may be no precedence. It's a completely new thing. These are it just happened to me. It might not happen to you. Something else might happen to you. So and then I also say that I survived. Nothing drastic happened to me, and I survived to tell my tale. So there are many who didn't survive to tell their tale. So it's a very difficult thing to answer, actually. But then, yeah, going with an open mind is important.
Yeah, and just give us a glimpse of, say, the stories which fetched you the Ramnath Goenka Awards, and twice, right? So you got that
Twice.
award for bravery, journalism of courage twice. So just give us a glimpse of those two stories. What were you covering, and what was this? Maybe the newspaper, these the jury might have found that this is exceptionally courageous.
One was actually about I met a mother, one of the mothers who had protested in front of the Assam Rifles headquarters, protested nude. So it's basically her story, and how she told me how on she's very traditional, uh, and whenever she goes for anything important, she touches her husband's feet. Like you come for this seminar and you touch your husband's feet and come. So she touches her husband's feet, and that day too, when she went out to strip herself naked, she touched her husband's feet and went out. So that's human side of the story. Because I asked her, you are a very traditional mother, a grandmother, tell me what happened that day. So that whole story that she narrated, so I think that strikes a emotional chord. She seems to be another grandmother, a very wise grandmother, and she felt that I felt like it was the last day of my life. This is something that's the last least we could. That was something that we could do for our daughters and granddaughters. And the other one was, I had exposed a fake encounter in Manipur, and I think that led to a civil uprising, and so that that was one story which I think I got the second Ramnath Goenka for. But I still feel that I cherish my the award that I got for reporting, writing about a sanitation story. The Wash Media Award. Uh, I actually, this is an award which is given by the Water Supply and Sanitation Collaborative Council and the Stockholm International Water Institute, and it is given for reporting on water, sanitation, and hygiene related issues. And I got it in the year for the year 2009 2010, and um, I received it in the World Conference of Science Journalists at Doha in Qatar. For me, writing about these kind of stories, writing a sanitation story, and it's very interesting how this story came about. Actually, this is a story about my domestic help. I was talking to her, and I know that her village is close to my house, and she lives in a place which is like flood prone. Otherwise, it's a very clean village. They have all, everyone has a toilet. It, and I asked her, when your village is flooded, how do you defecate? And that was the horror story that came out. I was appalled at the kind of, she said that we make a raft out of a banana tree, and usually in the evenings we go out to look for a dry spot. We Somebody rows the raft, and we go out, and it's all the more difficult for her because she is a widow. She can't ask another man to row the raft for her. And she said, once she said that we went there, I went there and I found a dry spot and I defecated. And after I came back, I saw my whole sari was blood stained, and then I realized there was a leech that had stuck onto my bottom. So that, these kind of things, when you hear them. And then she said sometimes we just starve so that we don't have to go out and defecate during floods. So that was the time when I realized that for us it's something so easy. We do it, we flush, and we forget about it. But for them it was an ordeal. And this is a story I got sitting in my living room. So for that's what I tell media students. I often interact with media students. I tell them that keep your eyes and ears open. There's a story lying in your backyard. You just
Around,
have to
yeah.
look for it. And in fact, I also coordinated a unique project called Sanitation Scribes, in collaboration with UNICEF. We wanted to bring into focus issues around water, sanitation, and hygiene in Assam, and look at the achievement of WASH targets, including elimination of open defecation and the availability of safe drinking water, uh, creating awareness and sensitization among communities, for which it is critical to make WASH issues an acceptable and urgent talking point in the public discourse. Now, till a few years back, it was a taboo to talk about menstruation, to talk about hygiene, to talk about defecation. But media plays an important role in raising relevant issues and increasing public consciousness. So I cherish that award because it was something different. I wrote about sanitation, and it fetched me an international award. And I think I'm the first Indian to get that. So I really cherish that award. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating to hear. And I think we are just there. We are about to kind of touch the time that was given to us. So we are heading towards the end of the session. I think we have already crossed the time that was given to us. So before we wind up, can you just quickly tell us, uh, maybe share with us the books or the writings or the authors or the journalists that you generally kind of read and get influenced by, or some of those works that have probably influenced you?
Uh, See, Shweta,
Maybe mostly from the
for
northeast, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
for the region, the northeast of India, uh, it's a paradise for journalists and writers. There are a lot of stories waiting to be told, and I'm glad that the diverse literary traditions of this heterogeneous region uh, is finally getting a voice to the different narratives and books emerging out of the region. We get to see a lot of novels, short stories, poetry, and most importantly, translations nowadays, translations of Assamese works. And as for non-fiction and journalistic narratives, most of them are primary sources now. They are based on first-hand experiences and analysis. And I remember reading the last book I read was something called Insider Outsider, and it is about belonging and unbelonging in Northeast India. It gives a very different narrative about the people from rest of India who have settled in the region and the kind of discrimination they face. So I feel all kind of narratives are important, and it's I think the process has just begun. People have started writing about telling their stories, and I look forward to more such narratives and journalistic writings. And it's very important to document personal narratives. I think this is happening at a very quick pace, and I'm very excited about it. Yeah.
Great. So I've just been told by the organizers that we have a couple of minutes as the comments come in, if there be some. So a quick take on maybe conflicts. Have so many dimensions. Like you can tell the story by engaging with the human side of the stories. You can talk about deaths. You can talk about the very hard way of telling the story. You can engage with a hard way of telling the stories where you just engage with five W's and one H, and there be it. So, what is perhaps your, philosophical maybe take on how conflicts should be reported, especially, it will be very helpful for journalists, or maybe aspiring journalists, the students who are listening to our conversation, as to what is the best way to report conflict. We totally understand from this conversation so far that we cannot miss out on human sides of the stories, and perhaps women tend to engage more with those dimensions. So just touch upon that as to what gets missed out when conflict stories get covered by the mainstream, and what is your entry point when you started, when you cover conflict stories, where you think, oh, this should, how do you gatekeep it in your mind, that this should be included and that should be excluded and things like that.
Uh, as I said earlier, I go with an open mind, and it's important to listen to everyone, and it's important to tell everyone's point, bring about everyone's version, and I also make it a point to talk to the women who are quietly sitting at a corner, who are not talking. So if you talk to them, you get another angle to it, and. As I said, I've written in my book as well that you have to go with, prepared, go prepared. You have to understand the nuances, you have to understand why and what. It's a very complicated zone, it's a very complicated, the conflict can be very complicated. So you have to understand what you are reporting on, and you have to keep yourself safe. That is also a very important aspect which we didn't do as when we were field reporters. And uh, I'm not talking about just physical safety, but also take care of your mental health, take care of your, any kind of trauma that you may face while, reporting conflict. Or say, for instance, I had gone to meet a mother of a child soldier in Manipur. And when I was talking to that lady, the mother, she started she hugged me and she started crying. She started showing her son's textbooks and her school bag, and for me it was a very emotional moment. But then I had to control myself. I had to, because I also had time constraints. I had to rush back. I had a flight to catch. So I had to, it's a very difficult thing. And as I said, there are no rules. There are no. You just have to use your intuition. You have to just think that, okay, now I think I should stop her and just talk to her if she's ready to talk. I know it's very difficult at times, but then you also have to get your story. So these are very important things. And yes, as a journalist, I think you should also please think about your own safety, and make sure that you don't suffer mentally, or suffer trauma because of the bloodshed or the, the violence that you see around you. It's very important too.
Thank you, Teresa, for underlining this requirement for training in trauma journalism, maybe, or maybe how to, provide safety and security training to journalists who get on to cover conflict regions. You have touched upon a lot of important aspects of covering conflict, and I would recommend once again, before we kind of wind up, many of you who probably be interested can go through this book, Bulletproof, a journalist's notebook on reporting conflict. So, thank you, Teresa, for sharing those very important insights. And we have Meher with us. So, over to you, Meher.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and thank you for this lovely, very, very enlightening conversation. And I can vouch for that because I've recently completed a major in media, and so I'm just so grateful to have, listened to this very enlightening conversations. Thank you, Teresa Rahman,
Thank
for
you so
reflecting
much.
on for reflecting on and sharing with us your experiences in terms of your training and the way the media functions. Thank you for reminding us that conflict sells, and that's something we should keep thinking about. Thank you also for talking about hostile environment and emergency first aid training. That is something that I looked up at because I wanted to know more about it. And thank you for talking about your feeling of being a survivor, the ways technology is being used to tell the life stories and spread hyperlocal news throughout Northeast India. And thank you also for reading from a chapter called Media Savvy Militants from your book. These have been
Thank you.
wonderful things that you've talked about. And thank you, Shweta Singh, for asking such questions aiming at not just experiences and success, but also learning, including questions around support systems, thought process behind choosing the title, incidents where being more careful was required, fear around being asked, for the need to tell the stories that are being told, the way balance is maintained uh, between being too close or too far, and about authors and journalists from the Northeast part of India that Teresa Raman reads and cherishes. And so, thank you both. And on behalf of Kalinga Literary Festival, I, Meher Gandhi, thank everyone who joined us today, this evening. And Kalinga Literary Festival is actively conducting literary events, and you can keep up with our activities and events through our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And that's all for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you so
Thanks.
much.